It's MA in Religion and Visual Arts.
Religion and Visual Arts from Yale. He's a photography professor at Bethel University. He's won several really respectable awards in Minnesota in the last couple of years, a couple of state arts board grants, as well as the Knight Foundation grant, which is a really prestigious grant in the state. So he's been really well there. And he does some interesting photographs. So he's going to be here talking about it. Take notes, right? Reserve some questions for anyone, and then you're more than welcome to
Thank you. All right. So I'm actually gonna start earlier than the work that's in the gallery a little bit. But this is I'm gonna start with a project that I did at the same time as I was doing work that was in the gallery. The series All Our Pleasant Places that is down in the space. I think there's like these 15 images down there from probably a series of photographs of about 70 photographs. So it was a very long-term, expansive project. I did some other things at the same time. So this talk is structured a little bit to give you maybe some sense of my process and how I'm thinking and working. So I also, while I was driving around making those photographs that you've seen, I ended up in Colma, California, which is just south of San Francisco. And it struck me as a very peculiar place. And so I made this series of postcards for it. They're, 36 postcards. They're printed on 4-color press. They're mailable. And then they're packaged together in an artist book. But what I became interested in is how Colma is a city of the dead. It became illegal to bury or cremate in San Francisco. And they even took it to the point where, citing issues of public health and newspaper stories of I believe my favorite sort of direct quote from that was ghoulish orgies that were taking place in cemeteries in the city. This is at the turn of the century. And so they actually dug up the cemeteries and shipped everybody south of the county line to Colma and reburied them. And so everything in Colma relates to this. These are not my photographs. These next two, they're Richard Barnes' photographs of the excavation done for renovation at the Legion of Honor Museum, in which they actually discovered that they'd failed to get rid of all of the dead people in San Francisco, and they found sort of under the land for the museum kind of a potter's field of people who they then packed up and shipped out. All the talk about, so here we can see this is all of the bones collapsed into a tiny little box that they uncovered in that excavation. So all the talk, of course, was about sanitation and various other things along those lines, but really the driving force in all of this was real estate. As property became more expensive in San Francisco, it was much better if we could sort of open up that land for development, for the living instead of the dead. So the dead got a new place to live. Here it is, Colma, California. So this right here, you can drive straight down from San Francisco right here on 82, El Camino, and you enter the town, and you can see all of these spaces. It's a little dark up here, but all these spaces, these big green spaces, are all cemeteries. We've got a little bit of a shopping center here, which actually is mostly car dealerships, which the parked cars on the lot seem an awful lot like graves. And then there's a landfill right over here, which is weird, and then a golf course, which also looks a lot like the cemeteries. So everything there seems very similar. So all of the businesses are, okay, so here's the box set of the postcards, right, with the map inset into it, and then there's this sort of red envelope, and the 36 cards, which I'll show you some of. Which way am I pointing? There we go. Everything there is a cemetery or an accessory business, and it's actually legislated into the zoning that there's a certain percentage is residential, so there are some living people there, but then there's a percentage that is set up for to only have cemeteries and accessory businesses, so headstone dealers, florists, things along those lines. So I created these postcards because of the way this place seemed like it was this destination, right? Kind of a tourist spot of a certain sort, right? One of kind of an eternal tourism, and as well as this place that then people had to come and travel to visit the graves of their loved ones, right? And so I've, for a long time, collected postcards, long before I made artwork. And so that sort of affinity for the vernacular photography influenced the way that I photographed these places, making them look like postcards, and then sort of doing this sort of overlay to make them appear as postcards from different sort of historical times. And you can see here the entrance to Green Lawn is right next to Flower Land. So it's convenient to get your flowers when you go. This is a non-sectarian endowment care. One of the things that really ends up being quite telling in Colma is how much these spaces are divided according to religion and race. This is Home of Peace. Where here, this one's actually was one of my favorite of the cemeteries because you can actually see the graves of Wyatt Earp and Levi Strauss. And at the very front of the cemetery, you can get a Xerox map to take you to them. Wyatt Earp's headstone has been stolen long ago, and so he has a nice modern headstone now. And somewhere, someone has the original one. And so, you get these things, these immaculately landscaped lawns, this giant sundial, which it just seems like such a weird thing, like such a fitting but maybe somewhat morbid thing to have in a cemetery. This sort of giant marker of time that looks like it's from Disneyland. Catholic cemetery, and all these places are, the Catholic cemetery is next door to the Jewish cemetery, which is next door to the Chinese cemetery, which is next door to the Japanese cemetery, which is next door to the pet cemetery. A lot of celebrity dogs in this cemetery. It's an amazingly scenic place. They legislated such that you cannot put up billboards in Colma. There are no giant advertisements anywhere because it's disruptive to the serene meditative quality that they want for their community and the people coming to sort of spend time with the deceased. So this became a very small contained project that I managed to do in like a year. Whereas the photographs that I'll show you next, like 7 or 8 years, I worked on this next project. And these postcards are also sort of very reflective, I think, in many ways, of sort of some of the themes that I'm interested in about the American landscape, about this sort of cultural construction in the landscape, about how that reflects who we are and our priorities and things that we're thinking about, things that we desire, as well as sort of the way that the postcard is also a reflection of travel, which is a big part of what I do in order to make my work. Because of this interest in landscape and movement around the country, and particularly American landscape, this idea of having something that you would take and then send back to someone else back home. As a kind of, with everything from actually to try and show them a little bit of what you're experiencing to some pithy little thing that you write on the back, wish you were here, and all of those sorts of things. That in many ways I think a photograph has some sort of characteristics in common with those kinds of things, right? This memorial, the memento, the record of what was, all these things that relate to cemeteries in some way, I think. Okay, so then now I'll show you this. And it's kind of telling, too, at the same time when I show these things, how much these are attached, or my work is attached to the places that I live, right? Like, so Colma, because it's just south of San Francisco where I was living. Before that, I lived in New Haven when I was at Yale, and became very interested in sort of the city planning of New Haven, and sort of the ideas that went with that. Right, when the Puritan settlers are establishing the city, they actually lay it out in this way intentionally to follow the pattern of Solomon's temple, right? I mean, the Puritans come and are building, right, the city on the hill, right? They're thinking in terms of constructing the kingdom of God on earth. Right? They're building it. They're constructing this paradise. And so I became interested in how that sort of continues, right? And one of the things that idea of sort of constructing the kingdom of God, building the kingdom of God, in a very literal way, they're thinking of it in spiritual terms, but they're also thinking of it in very physical terms, right? I mean, that's why they lay out the city the way they do. That idea becomes a very American idea. It gets translated into a political idea. So it exists as a religious idea, then as a political and cultural idea through the notion of manifest destiny, right? The sense that it is the American calling and duty to expand westward into the geographic limits of the territory, into the paradise that is California, right? I mean, the language is about paradise, right? It's about this idea of returning to the garden, and that it's an essential. It's not just a right; it's a duty, right? Because it's bettering these places. It's bringing them. By this time. They are, as it becomes a political idea, it's still couched very much in religious language, but it has another tone to it, one that starts to become about power and about economics, maybe increasingly, and maybe less about the spiritual dimension. But so these ideas are ones that I was very interested in what it means to create and transform things in the environment, right? With the idea of bettering them in some way, of mastering them in some way, right? Taking control of things to try and either to restore some sense of this lost Eden, or of to bring us back to or to bring us forward, right, to a kind of eschatological paradise, right? And so then how does that play out in the work for me? I mean, these ideas are things that I came to after photographing, right? So I'm photographing first and finding all of these things, and I'm drawn to them. And as I continue to work with them and make more images, I begin to start to see how this thinking is related to other things that I'm thinking about, and how those two things push back and forth into each other. This is it's just outside of Orlando, a place called Splendid China, which is no more. It is a very tiny Great Wall. And you can see here they've put little men here on horses, and then these are the lights for at night that they're next to. You can get a sort of a sense of scale. This was an amusement park where it was like all of China, very small. But this notion that we would build into the environment things that were supposed to be wondrous, right? Things that were supposed to inspire some kind of awe or joy or sense of this kind of utopic quality. But then they're either ridiculous or they fail through disuse and time. They don't necessarily always live up to those kinds of expectations that we might have for them. Oh man, these are really dark. Well, that one's downstairs. So these dinosaurs. I've been to a lot of dinosaur parks with this because really, in many ways, to me, the dinosaur park is like sort of is really this, right? Like this idea that you would try and recreate the sense of this kind of beginning of time, right? These sort of prehistoric monsters. This one's my favorite because they're just like in the woods, and you just like walk around and stumble on them, you know. And that one over there is eating the other one, and you know. And so it's like that. But the best part about this one, and I'll just tell you, it's in Michigan. I think you, as an audience, will probably enjoy this more than many other audiences. It's on. It's Huron, right? About halfway up. At the front entrance, you can go into a brontosaurus. And do you know what's inside the brontosaurus? Jesus. I'm not kidding. The fellow who built these in the 50s was responding to sort of Christian, sort of anti-evolutionary sentiment, and constructed this park that is like got giant Jesuses and dinosaurs, and the Jesus dwelling in the heart of a brontosaurus. You know, to say from his position, he's like, I don't see where there's a problem. You know, so in many ways, in the 1950s, a visionary, though he seems somewhat odd now when you look at the things he built. And starting to enter into the work a lot were these sort of taxidermied animals, which seemed to me that it became very much about the reverse of going out into the environment and building the thing, which was, okay, well, let's just take the environment and bring it in, right, to us. It's sort of the ultimate mastery and control over it.
Where did you find this?
This one, you know, here's the thing. This is actually not the weirdest part of this house, you know. But this was a very weird situation. A friend of mine called me on the phone. He was working on a film with a friend of his, and he said, "You've got to come over here." And I did. The gentleman who shot these was not there. I don't know if he knows I was ever there. But yeah, it's so.
Is this his garage?
Yeah, so this is like the living room on the left where they're sort of all in this sort of beautiful symmetrical flanking of the television, right? Which, like, what more can you have more American than slaughtering animals and then stuffing them and putting them, you know, around your TV, right? And then, yeah, that's his garage where he stores the extra animals and the nutcrackers.
Yeah. But I thought it was very odd that it was the nutcrackers that were covered in plastic.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very, very weird place. And this is a bar restaurant that was formerly a speakeasy in the 20s in the Delta region and Sacramento Delta region in California, where you get to eat underneath all this like big game from all around the world. That was shot by this guy by Bill Foster in the 20s. And then the best part is all the photographs, which you can see more detail in the print downstairs and stuff, but of Bill Foster with them dead, and then them dead up above him. This penguin is in Wyoming. It was brought back from an early expedition. Yeah, Little America. Yep. So yeah, this relationship right between sort of the human and the animal, the human and the natural, and how those things sort of come back and forth towards this kind of, well, this sort of distance, right? Lost since the expulsion from paradise. It's the ways we work into the landscape.
Like, how much are these snapshots and how much are they set up on site? And what do you do in terms of manipulating it?
These are not, I work with the 6x7 cameras as medium format. So if I'm outside, I can hand hold it. If I'm inside, I have to put it on a tripod. So that's the sort of level of, you know, kind of working speed in this. And for the most part, they are unmanipulated. I'm sort of, it's film. I'm scanning the negatives and, you know, doing sort of some pretty standard, just kind of photo finishing stuff on them, you know, to make the contrast and density and things look right, and bring out details. There are certain amounts of editing that happen. There were a bunch of people in this one. They were bugging me, so they're gone. Normally what I do is just wait them out. You know, if there's someone around, I just wait them out and take the picture when they leave. This place, they kept letting out bus loads like every, you know, 20 minutes or something. There was always one person who would just linger at the end of the bus load, and then like the next bus would show up, and I would just bang my head on the tree, and you know. But so I got rid of them because in the end, the photographs really, I mean, to a certain degree, I'm not interested in the photograph as a document as much, right? Like there's some of that, there's always some of that in a photograph. But I'm willing to sort of, what would sort of get a photojournalist fired, I'm willing to do that in order to sort of facilitate the idea of the photograph, right? So the vision of how I experienced the place, or how I got the sense of the place, in order to convey that sense rather than necessarily, you know, what it was specifically like at a specific time in this specific place. That seems less important to me. Yeah.
How did you take that? It looked like an aerial view last night.
Oh, I'm just up higher. You know, like just higher on the hill than the others. I get to look down a little bit. This is one of those things. I've photographed a lot, and you know, once I started becoming interested in this sort of taxidermy and moving things in, I photographed a lot in museums, and this one was such a, like, it was perfect. It was Bambi. It was, you know, they're just all there. They're happy together in the forest, all of the creatures. Pay no mind to the fact that one might eat the other. You know. I like my favorite is the fox, though, just like, you know, moving. And this elk is in front of a post office. And if you push this button down here, it makes an elk mating call. It seems cruel to other elk who might respond to me, but don't know. No. Yeah, so these are like discarded molds and sort of cast off things from an amusement park, sort of all kind of lumped together in this sort of graveyard of materials in the back lot.
So you're prowling around the backside.
I do. Yeah. I really try and do, I go to these places. I set out to a place with a sort of kind of an agenda of places that I want to go. 90% of those places are kind of a bust, but I find these other things on the way. Yeah, go to the back, right? Why do you just stay with what's presented to you? Really, it's only part of the reality of what's going on there. And I try and do all this without people knowing I'm there. I find that when people know you're there, they're less likely to let you do things. This is in the middle of the desert, like about halfway between Barstow and Vegas. And this is an old drive-in theater. And then right behind it is a cemetery with this really great pyramid mausoleum where I believe they have buried some pharaoh. And so I have this in as a kind of a transition, but then I'm going to interrupt my transition. So we'll see how this goes. I went on a state arts board grant to Hawaii to finish this project. As you know, I'd done all this driving and stuff all around the country, and it seemed like I really needed to go to Hawaii. It's the western terminus of American expansion, right? Like it's the culmination of manifest destiny, and so I needed to go there and see what was there. And so I have this photograph that sort of is in this All Our Pleasant Places series. It's where the lava flow has come and just wiped out the road, right? But the thing is I got really caught up in Hawaii while I was there, much beyond what happened much beyond what was going on for this project. So I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I'm going to show you this other thing. I made, when you're photographing and you come across something that you need to photograph, you just do it, whether it really fits in or not. If you have some kind of agenda, right, like project that you're working on, but you come in contact with something else, and then you figure out what it is later. And so I made some pictures that I actually thought were going to be for the All Our Pleasant Places project. But then this other thing happened, and so they became this instead, which is, it's designed as an altarpiece. It's called the Owatonna altarpiece, which Owatonna is a town like about an hour-ish south of the Twin Cities, I would say. There's only one thing there. Cabela's. Folks have Cabela here, probably. Do you? Okay, well, so you know. It's a gigantic store full of, like, hunting stuff, right? It's big. So I was there, and so I made these pictures that didn't really fit because I wanted to leave a person in them, which I don't normally do. I shot this scene without the people, and I shot it with this person in it, and I felt like I needed to leave the person in it. And so it didn't really fit in the other work. And I'd also been making a lot of these triptychs, and this became one of those. I teach probably every semester the Eisenheim altarpiece. So between making triptychs, like teaching that, and making this picture with this guy in it, I felt like this had to be something else. And so I'd never made an altarpiece before, but I did. The Owatonna altarpiece. I actually had to get Ken Steinbach, your previous exhibiting artist, to help me put the hinges on because I was afraid I was going to screw that up. All right, now let's see if this next part works. Oh, maybe it's not going to work. it should be opening for you. I can just open it for you then. So there, right. I would leave it installed in the gallery, sort of like open, but people could open and close it. And so it's still very dark. But so they set up Santa's lap in the middle of the like safari diorama, and I don't know. And then there's the Thomas Kincaid cottage back here, and stuffed bunnies and stuff down there with the presents. And it just seemed like Santa really belonged in there at the center of this weird kind of Christmas nativity scene thing. Yeah, I don't know. It was a strange thing. So I ended up making this thing. It's totally on the side, right? And it exists in this very self-contained little world outside of these other projects. Because they sort of, the two big projects are kind of overlapping in time frame, and then this is kind of in the middle of them. All right. Back to Hawaii. So the title of the project I started making in Hawaii is mahalo, which is a Hawaiian word for thank you. In the end, I became very interested in this word and chose it for the title of the project because it's one of those words that when tourists go to places and they learn like 3 words, right? This is one of them. When you go to Hawaii, this is like you learn this and you learn like kane for man, so that I can find out how to go to the bathroom, all right? So I can tell which door to use. Like so you only learn these, and this one, like I swear, tourists just like use it constantly. And it would drive me nuts. I mean, I was a tourist, so it's not necessarily anything against the tourists, except just like this use of this word was driving me insane. And it's this word, it's for thank you. It's for this, it's as a tourist trying to be gracious and things. But then I became even more interested in the word as I later discovered that there's some question about its origin. There's linguists who make an argument for the fact that the word was actually only developed post-European contact in the Hawaiian language, that sort of sailors and colonists and missionaries came and found the Hawaiian people to be a very gracious and grateful people, but they had no word for thank you. So this contact and this sort of people from outside pointing this out caused the Hawaiians to come up with a word. And as I began making photographs there, and thinking about what I was doing there, I was very conscious of myself as an outsider in response to what I'm photographing and what's happening there. Because Hawaii, while very much American, is also simultaneously very other. It's really different from anywhere else in the United States. And I mean, you could say that about most places, but this is to a much greater degree. It feels much more like you're in a foreign country than if you go to most other places in the continental U.S. So I went there to finish the one project, but I started photographing a lot more things than I expected, and widely outside the scope of what I normally photograph. Like I started photographing a little differently and photographing different kinds of things. So these aren't them. I just wanted to give you a little context. It came later after processing this stuff and starting to figure out what I was doing. Started to look and see what else was being done, or what else had been done in and about Hawaii. Because if you think about sort of the American landscape, there's a million photographers that have photographed the American West and the American South and all these places, and there's just like a lot of history and baggage in that. And so, you want to know where you stand in sort of the dialogue, right? You want to know what's happening. And so I started trying to figure this out, and I ended up at this show coincidentally, Dado Moriyama shows a Japanese photographer who became well known in the 70s as a street photographer, very high contrast, black and white images, and he spent a little time in Hawaii photographing. And this is an installation. I very much liked the way these were very large, butted right up against each other almost, to become this kind of cinematic sequence. But you can see this sort of, right, this is the kind of Moriyama's aesthetic. Very much carries through in the Hawaiian work. And then I started asking around. I started asking a gallerist that I know who's Hawaiian. And I asked, who's done work in Hawaii? And he's like, well, nobody. You know, I mean, it turns out that there wasn't very much, right? It's a kind of photographically semi-neglected part of the American landscape in comparison to what's going on elsewhere. Most of the pictures of Hawaii are beautiful landscapes. Right? The other person that comes to mind is Thomas Struth, who made a few photographs for this series, Paradise, in Hawaii. This is not Hawaii, nor is that. Nor is that. That is. But it's a series of photographs all about this sort of density of the jungle, right? It's not really about Hawaii in any sense. But it's about an aspect of Hawaii that I think is important, sort of the natural aspect, the sort of the scenic landscape part, which is very much a part of what it is. But so Hawaii shows up in people's work in this way, right, as a component of something else, talking about another idea. Okay, so this is some of the work that I was making there, and I show you this first as a sense of I exhibited this work for the first time this summer at Franklin Artworks. The installation had 2 walls, and the pieces they're 16 inches high, and they're stacked in this kind of, and laid out in this configuration, right? Because what started happening is I made these sort of very fractured and diverse things in response to what I was experiencing there. And I wanted to use sort of the structure of the installation to kind of help make some of those connections a little bit. So this is Akebono Taro. Well, a statue of him. I'd come to Hawaii with this vision that was formed by Magnum PI, Hawaii Five-0, Elvis movies, right? That was the Hawaii I was going to. I mean, I knew that wasn't reality, but it was still the one that like haunted the back of my mind, right? Grass skirts, surfing, and drinks with umbrellas in them. Right? Like that's Hawaii. This kind of idyllic vision of the islands. And I found that to be very much accurate. Like all of that was true, but incomplete. Right? And so the photographs, I think, as I've been working with them, kind of recognize both of these realities. One of the other things is how multicultural Hawaii is in a way that other places, even especially places of as low a population density as Hawaii is, are not. This photograph is related to this. Akebono Taro is a native Hawaiian who became a Japanese sumo champion, changed his name, and moved to Japan. But remains a kind of Hawaiian hero. The largest population, sort of ethnic population in Hawaii are Asian Americans, not Native Hawaiians, not Caucasians. Right? There's this mixing back and forth that is that's really interesting. This sort of cultural exchange. So there's a number of kinds of images in the series. Mostly photographs composing the core of the project, similar in many ways to photographs that I've been making before, landscapes, interiors, more still lives, and then people start creeping in, as well as photographs of artifacts that I brought back. And so this is a photograph of a map that you get in sort of your at the airport, you know, when you get off a tourist book map, which points out that if you keep going down this road, you have to watch out because it's like they've simulated the moon. There's a lot of space stuff in Hawaii. It's really interesting. But yeah, so they let astronauts trained here in their moon rovers on the lava rock. And then there are images, the images that I made and the images of the artifacts are modified by a couple of things. Images that I made from the television screen. So I came back, you know, and saw all these things and how these things were different from sort of what I expected, and started making photographs of my pre-vision of Hawaii. Right, so I photographed blue Hawaii, Magnum, and such, and you know, and it's quite easy to tell where they're coming, you know, that they come from the television through the pattern in the image. This one's hard to see, but this is a photograph of two like zebras almost kind of like nuzzling each other, which I'm not really sure what to make of this sign being put in front of a horse. Like, I'm not sure who's trying to convince who of what in this instance. But then the photographs of the television, this sort of pre-vision of Hawaii, have this counterweight in the project, which are these drawings that I started making of photographs that I wish I had made, but failed to make for some reason. Either a failure of vision, like I didn't realize at the time when I started doing this that I would have wanted that photograph, a failure of some sort of technique, you know, I just screwed it up, or a lack of access, you know, someone wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do. And these are these images that in any photographer that you talk to, I think you'll find that they have these photographs that they missed somehow, and they sort of haunt your mind. They linger back there. You wish you could go back to that and redo it. You wish you could get that, but you know you've lost that opportunity. And so this is my effort to recover them. But then the reality of that, of course, is the thing that I'm trying to draw, this photograph that I didn't get to make, is filtered through the same kind of memory and nostalgia for what happened as those kind of television images are that shaped my vision to begin with, right? So I come back and romanticize in my mind these dead frogs that I didn't photograph. And so if I'd actually made the photograph, would it have been like this? Would it have been any good? Who knows? But it's about this kind of reimagining and re-understanding after the fact of what these are. As I displayed them, they are printed the same as my photographs. So they are photographs. They are editioned as photographs. I wouldn't show you the actual drawing where you could see the stuff I screwed up along the way, and I was able to remove in post-processing, and and all of those sorts of things. But so yeah, they're photographs, and that's very much the way I want them, right? For conceptual reasons as well, that they remain photographs that I wish I had made. So. So I just show you a few more of these. This is in a church that was, the entire ceiling and walls are covered in murals painted by the priest. Look in there. A heiau is a Hawaiian holy site, and this one, the King Kamehameha Hotel, is located on a Hawaiian holy site, and you can see this heiau out the window of your hotel room. But they've also got this nice print for you in here. These Hawaiian history prints are at the Polynesian Cultural Center, which is run by the Mormons. It was an interesting balance to me, right? Fundamentally missionary culture creating missionary institution creating a site that was about preserving native culture. Is the Kauai telephone directory perpetuating stereotypical images of Hawaii. Magnum's helicopter, right? There's a whale breaching up here. This is a Belgian tourist traveling to Molokai, to the site of a leper colony that was founded by a Belgian priest. This kind of like way that this sort of pilgrimage exists there. Hawaii 5-0. A place to have your photograph made. You can't really see this one very well, but this is the kitchen at the Cocoa Palms Resort where Blue Hawaii was filmed and where Elvis used to stay and play whenever he went to Hawaii. It was destroyed in a hurricane in the 90s, and so it's now just a ruin. And then I'll show you this as the last one. These are at the Volcano House at Volcanoes National Park. And they're 19th century romantic landscape paintings of volcanoes, primarily at night. They developed this whole volcano school of painting where these people would come as tourists, artists, tourists coming, traveling there, making this arduous journey to paint these sort of very sublime kinds of locations. And it became interesting to me. I felt very connected to them as I, too, am sort of doing this same kind of thing, just with different tools and a little bit greater ease of travel than they had. So we'll stop it there because I think we've gone to time. But I can do questions, I guess, right? Yeah.
In the photos in the gallery, on the east wall, there's pictures of snow landscape. Is that like a parking lot, and then all the snow removed from the parking lot? Is that like how it's interacting with the human?
Yeah, right. So it's this. What I was really interested in that one is the way that, right. So the ones with the piles, right, and it's the two images are viewing the piles from one from like the front and one from the back, right. And so the plowed parking lot snow, right, which is revealed in the one image, and then in the other image is this sort of kind of sort of much more pristine feeling quality as it hides the parking lot. Right? So there's kind of manipulation of and sort of resistance against the environment through plowing the snow, but then also this kind of like hint of this, perfect kind of beautiful quality that even those piles of snow, I think, have as they are, have this weird sort of shifting grayscale thing happening from one pile to the next. One's a little purer than the other.
You were talking about the connection between manifest destiny and spirituality. Do you think that's come to an end? Do you think it's come to an end still going on?
Well,
Is Hawaii's paradise
do you want me to answer that in a within the confines of my work, or as a do I think like culturally and
a little bit?
it's okay.
Start with what you think, and then talk to us.
So I don't think that the impulse is gone, right? And I think you don't have to look very far in sort of contemporary political climate to see a religious impulse to shape and form society in a dramatic way, right? To shape it into the view that is believed to be, the kingdom of God, right? Yeah, bring it up the hometown heroes, huh? Yeah, right. No, but it's a perfect example, right? So you don't have to look very far. I would say that, but then I think that impulse continues to exist sort of outside of sort of the religious arena as well, right? Like in secular forms, which is what happened with Manifest Destiny, right? It became this secularized version of, trying to shape for the better and build this sort of perfect country and environment, right? Like I think that hope still exists in and out of sort of religious culture. In the work, well, Hawaii very much, I think, sort of, for me in thinking about this, has, some of these kinds of elements of engaging this notion of this paradise, right? And this sort of failure of it, as it kind of is and isn't, what you hoped for in this lush tropical Eden. And I think, though, the new work, the way it's sort of developing for me, and I'm not done with this. I'm sort of done photographing it, but I'm figuring out how to put it together and how to articulate it and what's going on with it. I think is kind of about this, for me, it's become very much about this sort of expectation and then sort of how that is realized and not realized, and then how I can sort of reshape it to be that thing or not be that thing through the way I put the work together, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Lex.
Oh, you're welcome.
There are refreshments outside. Please grab something and then head down to the gallery. Lex will be down there, and there'll be a chance to talk with him at that point as well.
Yeah.
I'd also like to put in a plug for our next show. This show will be up for another couple weeks, and then on Thursday, November 10th, this time at 6 o'clock, the two artists from the next show will be here giving a talk, and after their talk, there's a participatory opening event happening down there. They tore down this barn, and they're reconstructing a platform in the gallery on which some dancing might be happening that night for their reception. So it might be something to join. So that's November 10th. At 6 o'clock. Yes. But for now, please grab something to eat, and let's head down to the gallery.